Prologue: The Ordinary Life of Charlie. The sun was just beginning to set over the sleepy town of Maplewood, casting long shadows across the quaint, tree-lined streets. In a modest house at the end of Sycamore Lane, Charlie, a seemingly ordinary beagle, lay sprawled on the couch, his brown and white fur blending into the worn fabric. To anyone else, Charlie was just a lazy, good-for-nothing dog, but little did they know, his life was about to take a dramatic turn. "Charlie, you lazy mutt, get off that couch." Mr. Thompson's voice boomed from the kitchen. The retired detective hobbled into the living room, a newspaper in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. "You're lucky you're cute, because you're useless otherwise." Charlie's ears perked up slightly, but he didn't move. He had heard this 1,000 times before. Mr. Thompson loved him, sure, but the old man had no idea what Charlie was capable of. Not yet, anyway. Sighing, Mr. Thompson dropped into his recliner, groaning as his joints protested. He unfolded the newspaper and scanned the headlines. "Another robbery at the warehouse district. That place is a hotbed for crime these days," he muttered to himself. Charlie yawned and stretched, finally deciding to grace the world with his presence. He jumped off the couch and padded over to Mr. Thompson, resting his head on the man's knee. All right, you're forgiven," Mr. Thompson chuckled, giving Charlie a pat. "You want to go for a walk?" Charlie's tail wagged furiously. A walk was just what he needed. As they made their way down Sycamore Lane, the familiar sights and smells of Maplewood surrounded them. Charlie loved this town, despite its quiet, unassuming nature. He had always felt there was more to his life than just being a pet, but he never imagined how right he was. As they passed the old warehouse district, Charlie's nose twitched. There was something in the air, a scent that didn't belong. He tugged on his leash, trying to investigate, but Mr. Thompson pulled him back. "Not today, boy. We're sticking to the main road," he said firmly. Charlie reluctantly obeyed, but his mind was racing. He had to find out what was going on. That night, as Mr. Thompson snored softly in his bedroom, Charlie lay on the couch, his mind restless. Suddenly, a voice echoed in his head, startling him awake. "Charlie, you've been chosen to activate the super canine system." Charlie blinked in confusion. "What? Who's there?" he barked softly, not wanting to wake Mr. Thompson. "Your days of pretending are over. You've been granted extraordinary abilities to protect and serve. Are you ready to accept this mission?" The voice continued, calm and authoritative. Charlie hesitated. "What's the catch?"
"No catch."
"Just the opportunity to be more than what you are," the voice responded. Charlie's curiosity got the better of him. "All right, I'm in." "Congratulations, Charlie. Your first upgrade. Enhanced sense of smell and agility. Use these powers wisely," the voice said, fading away. Just as the voice disappeared, Charlie's senses exploded with new information. He could smell Mrs. Thompson baking cookies from 3 blocks away and hear the faintest rustle of leaves outside. It was overwhelming, but thrilling at the same time. Excited yet apprehensive, Charlie decided to test his new abilities. He waited until the house was silent, then slipped out through the doggy door and made his way back to the warehouse district. His enhanced senses guided him to a particular building that smelled of danger. "All right, let's see what's going on," Charlie muttered to himself, feeling a surge of determination. He sneaked into the warehouse, his paws silent on the cold concrete floor. Inside, he saw a group of men huddled around a table, examining what looked like blueprints and stacks of money. The scent of explosives was unmistakable. "What are you doing here, dog?" A gruff voice interrupted Charlie's thoughts. He turned to see a burly man with a scar across his face towering over him. Charlie's heart raced, but he remembered the voice's words. Using his new agility, he darted past the man and hid behind a stack of crates. The man cursed and turned back to his comrades. "We need to move this stuff out tonight. The cops are getting too close," the burly man growled. Charlie's mind raced. He had to warn Mr. Thompson, but how? He needed a distraction. Spotting a loose plank on the floor, he nudged it, causing a loud clatter. The men jumped up, their attention diverted. "Who's there?" one of them shouted, pulling out a flashlight. Charlie took his chance and bolted out of the warehouse, his paws barely touching the ground. He didn't stop running until he reached home, bursting through the doggy door and skidding to a stop in the living room. Mr. Thompson was already up, rubbing his eyes. "Charlie, what's gotten into you?" Charlie barked frantically, tugging at Mr. Thompson's sleeve with his teeth. All right, calm down," Mr. Thompson said, grabbing his coat. "Show me what's wrong." Charlie led Mr. Thompson back to the warehouse district. The old detective's eyes widened when he saw the men loading boxes into a van. "Stay here, Charlie," Mr. Thompson whispered, pulling out his phone to call the police. Charlie watched anxiously as Mr. Thompson relayed the information. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, and the men scattered like cockroaches. The police arrived just in time to catch them red-handed. Mr. Thompson looked down at Charlie, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and confusion. "How did you know?" he murmured. Charlie wagged his tail, his secret safe for now. He had a feeling this was just the beginning of his adventures. With his new abilities, Charlie was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. The next morning, Mr. Thompson couldn't stop talking about the night's events. "You're more than meets the eye, aren't you, buddy?" he said, scratching Charlie behind the ears. Charlie barked in agreement. Yes, he was more than just a lazy dog. He was Charlie, the super canine detective, and Maplewood had no idea what was coming. Chapter 1: The Awakening. The early morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the living room. Charlie lay in his usual spot on the couch, his mind racing with the events of the previous night. He had barely slept, overwhelmed by the new abilities he had discovered and the realization that he was no ordinary dog. Mr. Thompson shuffled into the room, yawning and stretching. He glanced at Charlie, who was unusually alert. "Morning, boy. Did you even sleep last night?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Charlie barked softly, his tail wagging in response. He couldn't exactly explain what had happened, but he had a feeling Mr. Thompson would figure it out soon enough. After breakfast, Mr. Thompson sat down with his coffee and newspaper, as was his routine. He glanced at the front page and sighed. Another robbery foiled at the warehouse district. Thanks to an anonymous tip, he read aloud, a small smile playing on his lips. "I wonder who that could have been." Charlie barked again, more insistently this time. He wanted Mr. Thompson to understand that it was him, but how? All right, I get it. You want to go for a walk," Mr. Thompson said, getting up and grabbing Charlie's leash. "Let's see what trouble you can sniff out today." As they strolled down Sycamore Lane, Charlie's enhanced senses were in overdrive. He could hear conversations from houses they passed, smell the aroma of breakfast cooking, and even detect the subtle scent of fear from a squirrel hiding in a nearby tree. It was exhilarating and a bit overwhelming. They made their way to the park, where Charlie usually liked to chase squirrels and play fetch. But today, his mind was elsewhere. He had a mission now, a purpose. He needed to understand his new abilities and how to use them effectively. "Come on, boy, fetch," Mr. Thompson called, throwing a stick. Charlie darted after the stick, his speed and agility surprising even himself. He reached the stick in record time, but something caught his attention. A group of kids were gathered around a tree, whispering excitedly. "Look at that dog. He's so fast," one of the kids exclaimed. Charlie puffed out his chest proudly, enjoying the admiration. But then he noticed something unusual. One of the kids was holding a small, frightened kitten. Hey, let it go, another kid said nervously. It looks scared. Why should I? The first kid sneered. It's just a dumb cat. Charlie growled low in his throat. He hated bullies, and he wasn't going to stand by and let this happen. He dropped the stick and trotted over to the group, barking loudly. The kids jumped back, startled. Whoa, calm down, dog, the bully said, but there was a hint of fear in his voice now. Charlie bared his teeth, his eyes locked on the kitten. The bully hesitated, then reluctantly set the kitten down. It darted away, disappearing into the bushes. Mr. Thompson, who had been watching from a distance, walked over, a proud smile on his face. Good job, Charlie. Always the protector, huh? Charlie barked happily, but his mind was still racing. He needed to test his abilities further to understand the extent of what he could do. And he knew just the place to do it. That evening, after Mr. Thompson had gone to bed, Charlie slipped out of the house and made his way back to the warehouse district. The memory of the burly man from the previous night still fresh in his mind, he knew there was more to uncover. As he approached the warehouse, his enhanced senses picked up on something unusual. Voices, faint but distinct, coming from inside. He crept closer, his ears straining to hear. I'm telling you, we need to move the goods tonight, a voice said urgently. The cops are onto us. Charlie recognized the voice. It was the same burly man from before. He edged closer, peering through a crack in the door. Inside, the man was talking to a smaller, nervous-looking accomplice. But where are we going to hide it? The smaller man asked, wringing his hands. We'll figure it out. Just start loading the van, the burly man replied. Charlie's mind raced. He needed to get this information to Mr. Thompson, but he couldn't risk being seen. He turned to leave, but his paw knocked against a loose piece of metal, sending it clattering to the ground. What was that? The burly man snapped, turning towards the door. Charlie froze, his heart pounding. He had to think fast. Using his enhanced agility, he darted away, hoping to disappear into the shadows. Get that dog, the burly man shouted, and the smaller man scrambled after Charlie. Charlie ran as fast as he could, weaving through the maze of crates and boxes. His mind was focused on one thing, getting back to Mr. Thompson and warning him. But as he turned a corner, he found himself face to face with a tall, chain-link fence. He skidded to a stop, his heart sinking. There you are, the smaller man said, catching up to him. Thought you could get away, huh? Charlie growled, his eyes darting around for an escape route. He noticed a small gap at the bottom of the fence, just big enough for him to squeeze through. He lunged for it, but the man grabbed his tail, yanking him back. Not so fast, Mutt, the man sneered. Charlie twisted and turned, using his new strength to break free. He managed to slip through the gap and took off running, the man's shouts fading into the distance. When he finally reached home, he was panting and exhausted. He scratched at the door, and Mr. Thompson opened it, his face etched with worry. Charlie, where have you been? He demanded. I was worried sick. Charlie barked frantically, trying to convey the urgency of the situation. Mr. Thompson frowned, then seemed to understand. All right, boy, show me. Charlie led Mr. Thompson back to the warehouse district, his heart pounding with anticipation. He had to make sure Mr. Thompson saw what was going on. As they approached the warehouse, they saw the men loading boxes into a van. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened, and he pulled out his phone to call the police. We need backup at the old warehouse district, he said, his voice steady despite the tension. Hurry. They hid behind a stack of crates, waiting for the police to arrive. Charlie's heart raced as the minutes ticked by. Finally, the sound of sirens filled the air, and the men scrambled to escape. The police swarmed the area, arresting the burly man and his accomplice. Mr. Thompson looked down at Charlie, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and confusion. "You did it again, didn't you, boy?" he murmured. Charlie barked in agreement, his tail wagging furiously. He had a feeling this was just the beginning of his adventures. With his new abilities, Charlie was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other.